Cassie, or my emails would have come from you from Cassandra, but I've always gone by Cassie until I came here, and my email is Cassandra. I've been here at the State Department for about 6.5 years. Prior to being here at the department, I worked in CACFP at the sponsor level as a family daycare home sponsor, and I did that for about 10 years. So I have a good number of years behind me and experience working with CACFP. I started out here as the family daycare home coordinator, and then I went to the field and was administrative coordinator, which we call those regional specialists, I think that's what we call them. We changed their name, regional specialists. Those are the people that will come out and do your technical assistance, your training on site. They'll do your approval visit when you get to that point. I did that for a while. Then I came back in the office, and back in April of 2020, I was lucky enough to obtain this position as the director of CACFP and summer food programs, and I love it. So moving on, at any time you have any questions, you are welcome to speak up, put it in the chat, interrupt me if something doesn't make sense, because like I said, sometimes I just kind of go on a squirrel chase. So here we go. I'm going to turn my camera off for right now. So Child and Adult Care Food Program. Everyone's heard of the National School Lunch Program. And this is a program that is really kind of under that same umbrella of food programs. It's just geared towards child and adult care centers. Just like NSLP, the CACFP, it is a voluntary program. But this program enables centers and organizations to provide more nutritious meals to the children and adults in their care. So one of the requirements is, and you'll hear me say this more than once today, is that you're able to operate this program without funds of this program. If you're a licensed child care facility, you have to provide meals anyhow. And those meal patterns that DHS require are in line with our meal patterns anyhow. So the intent of this program is not to fund your meals. It's to increase the nutrition and to add variety to the meals that you're already serving. But that also applies to any institution that applies for this program. The Child and Adult Care Food Program, or CACFP, we have lots of acronyms in this program. It's a federal program that's funded by USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and Food and Nutrition Services. So it is federal money. I think a lot of folks have the misconception that this is just state money. It's not. We're just a pass-through entity. We get the money from the federal government, and we disperse it onto you as a reimbursement for your costs for these meals. And again, it's the program that provides reimbursement for nutritious meals and snacks to eligible children and adults who are enrolled for care at participating child care centers, daycare homes, and adult care centers. I do see someone just put in the chat about switching computers. Yeah, you're fine. You had to switch. Sometimes people get booted off, just get back on, and we'll make sure, as long as you're on the majority of the time, you're good. CACFP also provides reimbursement for meals served to children and youth that participate in after-school care programs, children residing in emergency shelters, and adults over the age of 60 or living with a disability and enrolled in daycare facilities. So essentially, CACFP contributes to the wellness and healthy growth and development of young children and adults in our nation. Who administers this program? So the state does. USDA's Food and Nutrition Service administers it through the programs through the states. State agencies, which is what we are, State Department of Ed, we're responsible for monitoring all institutions who participate in the CACFP to ensure compliance with meal patterns, record keeping, and a multitude of other program requirements, which our program requirements, they change. They change, not constantly, but every year there's always going to be something new implemented, whether it be because we're just trying to strengthen our program, or because we've had an audit finding and found a weakness that we have to strengthen our processes. So it's always changing. So anyway, this program is administered within most states by its designated educational agency. In certain states, other agencies will house it, like the Department of Health or Family and Social Services. But in Oklahoma, it's decided that, and it's always been the case, that it's housed in the Department of Education, but it could change at the discretion of our legislature. CACFP essentially provides cash reimbursement to Head Start, family daycare homes, child care centers, homeless shelters, and after-school programs for meals and snacks served to children and adults. And like I said before, this program is also, we have licensed adult care centers. And while adults are eligible, the bulk of the funding is directed towards younger children. Approximately 2/3 of the 2 billion years served every year, and I think that number has increased. On a different slide, I have some more current statistics, but approximately 2/3 of the meals served through these programs go to public or private nonprofit child care centers and Head Start programs. Oh yeah, here's where I have ours. So currently in Oklahoma, we have 10 adult daycare sponsors. And some of those have more than one site. So we have about 13 adult sites that operate, which is not too many. We have 520 institutions. And what we call an institution is like you will be an institution. That's the term that's used, what you will be. One entity, whether you're a single site entity or you're a sponsor and have multiple sites. So we have 520 individuals, institutions made up of childcare centers and nonprofit at-risk programs who combined serve over 1,000 sites in our state that are on this program. Then we have 18 family daycare home sponsors who serve over 1,100 providers in our state. And right now we don't have any emergency shelters participating in the program. We had one up until last year and they decided that to go elsewhere for funding, is my understanding. And the family daycare homes providers, if you've ever been a family daycare home provider, they can be on the program, but they have to go through one of those sponsors. And then we work directly with that sponsor of family daycare homes. So why does CACFP matter? So its greatest strengths are just basically the benefits it provides to children for their health and dietary intake. Research shows that children who receive meals through this program are less likely to be in poor health. They're less likely to be hospitalized, and they are significantly more likely to have healthy weight and height for their age and children than those children that just receive meals solely from home. Studies also show that low-income children who also have found that CACFP participation increased consumption of milk and vegetables, and it reduced the prevalence of overweight and underweight among low-income preschoolers. So essentially, because of the increased variety and availability of food and higher nutrition that this program can provide, these children have, a better chance at getting more nutritious meals while they're in your care rather than just at home. And I think most of you probably working in this industry, unfortunately, know that that's true. In our in FY2020, so the fiscal year of CACFP operates on the federal fiscal year. So it begins October, ends in September. And much of you are in here because we've been waiting on our new fiscal year stuff to be ready. So it's kind of a crazy time right now. We're taking on new people. We're also working on getting our existing institutions their renewal application, which is set to come out tomorrow. So anyway, in 2020, nationwide, CACFP averaged about 4.3 million participants and served nearly 1.6 billion meals, which totaled to $2.8 billion in expenditures. So if that tells you how much money is poured into these programs, and that was just FY2020, and that was affected by COVID, because we lost a lot of centers. A lot of places just had to shut down. In FY21, so that's October of 2020 to September of 21. In Oklahoma alone, we had we reimbursed a total of just under 32 million meals and snacks. And that came to a grand total of just under $65 million paid out. So that's just our state alone. So it's tons of funding in this. And that just goes to show you why we take our job very seriously. We are stewards of federal tax dollars, and we want to make sure that you are using those dollars in the appropriate way. So anyway, the numbers that I gave you are still kind of lower than pre-COVID, but we're definitely over the hump. We're on our way back up, and we have a lot of new applicants. So I'm glad you guys are all on here today. This might be the biggest group I've had ever on orientation. Okay, so who can apply for CACFP? Obviously, if you're in this class, it's you. We can have for-profit or nonprofit childcare centers, Head Starts, family daycare homes, which, like I said before, they have to go through a sponsoring organization. Nonprofit organizations that operate the at-risk after-school program, school districts operating at-risk after-school programs, emergency and homeless shelters, and adult daycare centers. So who's not eligible to participate? If you're any of those things and you're on the National Disqualified List, you're not eligible, unfortunately. The National Disqualified List is a universal list used by us and other programs that USDA has, that if you are ever found in non-compliance that's serious enough that you become terminated, you are also disqualified for 7 years. And it does affect your eligibility for other things other than just CACFP. I do know that DHS subsidy contracting utilizes that list as well. So it can affect things. You don't want to get on that list. So real quick, I'm going to launch a poll. And I want to see what program do you currently or plan to participate in? And have you been on the food program before? Do you guys see the poll? Can you respond to it? There we go. I kind of just like to do this so I make sure I'm talking about the right topics and not going over things that don't apply to the group. But I think we've got a good group, a diverse group today. Well, a lot of daycares. Okay, I'll give you a couple more minutes or a couple more seconds to do the poll. There we go. I knew we had some at-risk in here. A lot of brand new people. Great. I'm excited. I'm excited to have new and renewing folks on here. Okay, awesome. All right, so that was helpful for me. Okay, moving on. So we'll kind of go over the different types of institutions and know how you're eligible and what, the bare minimums of being eligible to participate. Any childcare center who's licensed through DHS may be eligible to participate in this program. Several years ago, like I think back in the 70s, maybe, I've tried to put my finger on the law that was passed that changed this, and I haven't been able to, but way back, before any of us probably had anything to do with these programs, the only way to be eligible to participate in CACFP was that you were a licensed childcare center and at least 25% of the kids that you had in care received Title 20, which is what you guys know as DHS subsidy. We're slowly trying to change our terminology because most of you don't know what Title 20 is. It's called subsidy now. But that was the only way to be eligible for this program. And 18 years ago, they decided to open it up to other types of institutions, to allow nonprofits, and to also allow a for-profit center. They don't just have to have 25% of their Title 20, but we can also look at how many of your children qualify as free and reduced. So after Congress extended that eligibility, it allows centers, more centers to participate. Similar to how school lunches have free, reduced, and paid meals, CACFP uses those same income application, which we call family size and income application, or another one of our acronym FSIA. We use those just like schools do to determine a category that a child falls into. So if you're if you're any center, this doesn't apply to at-risk. If you're any center, not a family home, just a daycare center, you're going to disperse all these forms to your children in care regardless. And we're going to look at them and see, you have to approve them and see if they qualify for free and reduced, not paid. We call it not eligible in CACFP. So the difference with NSLP and how we use those income applications in CACFP is that it's just deciding what income range and the low income, whether they're low income or not. That's what it's deciding. In a school setting, it decides what rate your kid would have to pay for a meal, right? We're just using those to categorize the kid, which will eventually determine how you're paid for your claim. Okay, so I explain all that for you to know that one of the first things you're going to do as a child care center, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, is that you're going to disperse these income applications to everyone. You're going to have to review them and approve them, and you'll learn about that in your admin and purchasing class. which is one of the classes that you're required to come to if you're brand new before doing the VCA. You have to learn how to look at those and approve them correctly, because we'll come out and look at your applications and verify that they've been done correctly. But to be eligible as a for-profit daycare on this program, at least 25% of your kids have to receive DHS subsidy, or 25% have to qualify as free and reduced based on those applications. And then, like I said, regardless of whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, you still will use those, how those children are categorized, free, reduced, or not eligible, will determine how you're paid. You're kind of paid on a blended rate. And I know I'm getting ahead and we'll talk about that again later, but the more free children you have that qualify as free in your center, obviously the higher that you'll get paid for those meals, because there's different pay rates for those categories. It's really just so that, to be able to target the areas, the centers that are in the areas with most need. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, speak up, let me know. So nonprofit centers, to be eligible, they just have to have a 501c3, or if you're faith-based, it's not required. So if it's a daycare center in a church facility, you don't have to have that 501c3. The 501c3 is just that IRS notification that you are a charitable organization, nonprofit institution, basically. They're exempt from that 25% rule. They don't have to have Title 20 or 25% free or reduced. You're still going to fill out the applications, because that's what you have to report on your claim, and it determines your pay rate, like I explained, but you're exempt from that eligibility of having to have 25%. The 25% just applies to our for-profit institutions. Some centers might have multiple sites, such as, for an example, like your La Petites or Child Pines. In those cases, institution is called a sponsoring organization, or SO. And so then the SO is responsible for training and monitoring all those sites under their sponsorship. And SOs of centers will submit claims for reimbursement and disperse those funds to their sites, or sometimes they don't operate like that. A lot of our sponsors of centers basically just provide the ability for those sites to pay for the meal or pay for the food, or purchase the food for them, and then the SO just keeps the reimbursement. It just depends on how you have it set up. If you're not a sponsor, then none of that even applies to you. Let's see. I didn't mention though, all of our daycare centers that come on, childcare centers that come on, they have to have a current DHS license or permit, obviously. There are institutions that may not have a DHS license, like military bases or tribes. They have their own licensing standards sometimes. Military, or you said military. Those are usually more stringent than DHS anyway. We do honor those as well. We are allowed to do that. But regardless, as a child care facility, you have to be licensed. So Head Starts can be on the program. The Healthy Meals for American Act allows children who are enrolled in a federally funded Head Start program to automatically be considered free. Their eligibility, their category of what they're considered is free. And if you recall, like I said before, that free doesn't mean some kids get a free meal and some don't. In childcare centers, you're not charging for meals, right? That free, reduced, and not eligible just determines how you are paid for that child's meal. And when we use the term not eligible, that kind of throws people. And then again, you're going to learn about this in your admin and purchasing training more. But not eligible doesn't mean the child's not eligible for a meal. It just means that is not a low-income child, and you'll be paid at the lowest rate for their meal. You still get paid for it, it's just at a lower rate. But when it comes to Head Starts, all those kids, they're automatically considered free. So a Head Start is going to be paid at the highest rate possible for all the meals they supply to their children. In order to facilitate the implementation of this provision of the Healthy Meals American Act, Head Start programs, they have to documentate the Head Start enrollees, and they have to annually update their information, and then they have to keep their records of those children that were enrolled in the federally funded Head Start for 3 years, which is standard practice with our program too. You have to keep 3 years past and the current year. So for most of you, it's a moot point because you're just getting started, but just know you have to keep 3 years past and the current year. So again, basically Head Starts are just exempt from having to collect those income applications that I explained, like a typical child care would, but they're required to follow every other CACFP record keeping requirement. And again, all these kids are considered free, so that Head Start's paid at that highest rate possible. Family daycare home sponsors, they're just family daycare homes are just different altogether. Everything about pretty much, except for, the meal patterns that are required for the providers. They're just a whole different can of worms, right? So family daycare home SOs can operate, and they have to be a private nonprofit, and they have to have a 501c to show that. Providers, they work with the providers. Providers really aren't contracted with us. We don't have any contracts or agreements directly with the providers. The sponsors do. We have the agreement and the sponsor we have the agreement in the application with the sponsor. Okay, so most SOs for family daycare homes have their providers sign a yearly contract to ensure they'll remain with them, and providers cannot switch from one SO to another within the same fiscal year. But when it's time for application renewal, which is right now, the SOs really want to make sure they know who's going to stay with them, because the difference about family daycare home sponsors is the sponsors, kind of like we're the pass-through entity for the funds we get from USDA, and then we pay a center. A sponsor for family daycare homes is just the pass-through entity to get the providers their money, right? So we pay the sponsor after they submit a claim. Every month they have to combine their claim and submit it to us, and we pay them one lump sum. Then they're responsible for paying all their providers. Well, they get what's called an administrative fee that they can use to pay for administrative costs, because they can't just do this, without any reimbursement for their administrative cost. And that's what's different about family daycare homes. The full payment goes to a family daycare home that they said, I claim this many meals, and we pay them for those many meals, right? But then for every home that the sponsor has every month, they get a certain dollar amount for each of those homes. And it's like a tiered pay rate. So for the first 50 homes, they get paid so many dollars, and so on and so forth. And that's how it's determined what a family daycare home sponsor is paid. Right now, we don't have many. Well, we have, I think, 17 sponsors, I think is what I said. And that's the lowest we've been in years. One of the first requirements for coming on as a family daycare home sponsor is that there has to be a need, and that's regulatory. And when I use that term regulatory, that means it's something in regs that says, yes, we can require that, right? But regs say that the states have to kind of determine what that need is per state. And so in Oklahoma, we say, if you want to be a family daycare home sponsor, we need you to find an unserved area with at least 50 children who are not, 50 providers who are not currently on a program and would like to be. And that's pretty hard to come by right now in our state. With 17 sponsors, even though it's pretty low, our areas are really saturated, and especially after what COVID did to all of our child health facilities, we lost a lot of providers. So I would never discourage anyone from trying to come on as a family daycare home sponsor, but it's important to know that we have to see the need of an unserved area. And in the metro areas, you're not going to find the need. Daycares are paid differently too. They have a higher, different tier rates. So a provider that lives in an area that has more higher low income rates, they're going to be paid at the higher rate. Whereas providers that live in more, that have less low income, if that makes sense, they get paid at a lower rate. It's a substantially lower rate. Typically those people on that tier 2 rate that they don't make much, they just say to heck with it, because it's paperwork they don't have to deal with, and they don't really want to deal with it for the amount of money they get. And I just say all of that to iterate that there's not a lot of unserved providers in Oklahoma right now that aren't on a program that want to be. And right now we have a waiver with COVID. It's one of the very few waivers we still have that USDA has granted the states because of COVID. Everyone in the state for a family daycare home provider, they're all paid at that higher rate. They're just like, okay, everybody's getting the higher rate because of what's going on. And even with that, we're not seeing a lot more providers come on board. So And like I said, I mentioned before, we have those different pay rates, the different ways we look to figure out how a provider is paid at the higher rate. First, we look at school districts. So we look at that address, and just like if you were trying to find out where your child would be going to school, like you got to find out what school is assigned to your address. We do the same thing with that family daycare home address. And then we look at the low income report for that school that's assigned to that address. And the low income report is put out by our school side, the National School Lunch. And it tells us there are this many free, this many reduced, and this many paid kids in that school district, right? If at least 50% of the kids in that school that's assigned to that home address, if at least 50% of those kids are free and reduced, then they're paid at that higher rate. And that's how most of our tier 1 are eligible by tier 1 in Oklahoma, because the vast majority of our schools have at least one school site that has at least 50% of the children in it that receive free and reduced meals. But then beyond that, we have other ways. We can look at census data. We can look at income. We don't have a lot of providers that are just straight tier 2, that lower rate. But we do have some. So just because they don't qualify at the higher rate doesn't mean they can't participate. Those family daycare homes can participate. They just might be paid at the lower rate. Okay, we got that nonprofit at-risk organization. They have to be a nonprofit with a 501c3. All of these institutions have to be a legitimate private nonprofit, with the exception of a school at risk, and we'll talk about that next. I don't think we have any schools on though. I may not harp on that too much. Oh, no, we do. Okay. So to qualify, these organizations have to be tax exempt if it's a nonprofit one. And examples of these would be like a food bank or community action agency. And we have a lot of those on our program, actually. The majority of these in our state are multi-sided sponsoring organizations with unaffiliated sites. So affiliated means that it's actually part of that institutional organization or businesses legally, right? So for unaffiliated site, it's necessary that each site also have a 501c3 and show that that site is also nonprofit status. And a site agreement has to be in place before we'll approve operating a CACFP at-risk site at an unaffiliated site. Basically, because we just want to make sure that there's, the liability, there's liability there. If you're on our program and you're serving at this site, we want to make sure you have permission at that site to serve. So like if it's at a local park here in the city, we will contact the Parks and Rec of Oklahoma City and make sure, yeah, this is okay. So anyway, it's just for liability purposes to make sure you have that agreement in place. USDA requires that all our programs follow state and local law when it comes to childcare licensing. And in Oklahoma, there are many exemptions why you wouldn't have to have a license if you provide some type of childcare. Most of our at-risk that are exempt from the law is because they care for children less than 15 hours a week. So in Oklahoma, and I think that might be nationwide, I don't know, I need to find out if that's true because I keep saying that in this training, but I know in Oklahoma, if you care for children more than 15 hours a week, you have to have a license. And a lot of these at-risk programs, at-risk was designed to be operated after school. They just do it a couple or 3 hours a day, so they don't have to have a license. And so many of them, we just know if their hours don't exceed 15 hours, that's the exemption you can use. But there's a laundry list that you can go on DHS website that will tell you how you could be exempt. At-risk sites must also be located in that low-income area. So that same report I talked about earlier, the low-income report from the National School Lunch and how we tier a provider for the higher rate, we also use that same report to look at an at-risk site. So we figure out what school is assigned to that address. We look at what their low income rate is, and it has to be at least 50% free or reduced in those children receiving free and reduced meals in that school site. Reason being is that's the intent of the at-risk. It's to focus and reach out and serve at-risk children in those more low income areas. So if it's not, the exception or the difference between this and how we tier providers is if it's not located in a 50% area, you just can't have a site in that area. In the event SO sees a need at a site located in a school district, the school district is always given priority, right? Because almost all the school districts in our state are on the National School Lunch Program, right? So if there's a need for meals to be served, generally the school is going to want to take responsibility for that and make that their site. So we'll always reach out to the school and ask for permission, whether they're currently participating in CACFP or not. And more times than not, the schools are like, well, you know, we got this. But there are some instances where they do allow it. So one thing about at-risk is the organization has to offer an educational or enrichment program, things like tutoring, arts, reading. All the children don't have to participate, but it has to be available for them to participate while they're there. While the sites can be closed only to serve a certain enrolled group of children, generally these at-risk sites are open to allow any school-age child to come and receive a meal. I don't know that we have any closed enrolled sites right now for at-risk. Everyone, all the at-risk sites we have generally are just like, you got any kid under the age of 19 can come have a meal. And again, if they have more than one site, if they're a sponsor, they are required for monitoring and ensuring compliance of all their sites. Then we move on to public school districts operating at risk. Public schools don't have to do quite as much when they come on. We do have public schools that come on with childcare centers as well. And the criteria for what they have to meet to show financial viability and capability, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, it's not quite as stringent because they're already operating another food program out of our office. So we know that they're capable and that they're viable if they're already in good standing in another program. So by regs, there's not quite as much as a school district has to do. So for school districts operating in at-risk, again, basically the only requirements that you have to be a school site that's at least 50% free and reduced. If you have one site in your district that is at least 50%, then you are eligible to serve meals at all those sites. The one difference for a school than any other at-risk is you have the option to serve before the actual end of school, because this program was designed to be an after-school program, right? That's the name of it, at-risk after-school program. But schools have the exception to where they could serve generally within their last period of school. And it's kind of a tricky situation because we have to count the number of hours of education and all that. So what regs say about the extended learning hour is what it's called, is that after you've completed a full day of education, if the children are still in care, if the students are still in school, you can serve during that extended hour, only if you go an extra hour after the end of the day. And I know that's confusing. So in Oklahoma, what's considered a full day of school is 6 hours, right? 6 hours of rigorous education. So basically we just look at your bell schedule and we back out lunch. And when we see that 6 hours have been completed, we then have to ensure that you go an additional hour, because that's why it's called the extended learning hour. So you have to be in class a full 7 hours to be eligible for that extended learning hour. And we do have some that do. Even if it's off just by like 5 or 10 minutes, we can allow it. And so if you're interested in that, if you're a school and you're in here and you're interested in that extended learning hour, you might have to look at changing your bell schedule for next year or something. I know it's too late now, but anyway. So same goes for schools. If you're multi-sited, you have to train and monitor all your sites. You're responsible for them and their program compliance. Emergency homeless shelters. We don't have anybody in here in this class right now that is applying to become one of those, and we don't even have one that participates, unfortunately. But to be eligible, this shelter must be a public or private nonprofit institution or a temporary residential site householded by a public or private nonprofit agency. Emergency shelters that participate in CACFP provide residential and food services to children experiencing homelessness. CACFP just serves those children and teenagers up to the age of 18 who are residing in those shelters. Persons with disabilities, regardless of their age, may also receive meals at the shelters where they reside. Residents who receive their meals at the shelter are automatically eligible for free meals. So there's none of the income applications and all that, like I talked about with your daycare centers. Just like with our Head Starts, emergency shelters don't have to do the applications and they receive the most meal benefit for those children, which means they're paid at the highest rate for the meals they serve their children. Adult daycare centers. I don't think we have any of those in here today either, but I'll briefly go over that. So adult daycare centers are considered eligible for reimbursement for meals served who serve meals to persons 60 years of age or older, or to chronically impaired disabled persons in a non-residential group setting, so an adult daycare center. For the purposes of determining their eligibility in this program, it is sufficient that such a center cares for elderly or functionally impaired adults. It is not necessary that the majority of the clients receiving care in the center be functionally impaired, though. The adult daycare component of this program offers funding for meals to adults in those centers. In Oklahoma, adult daycare centers are licensed through the health department. So they also have to be licensed, but it's through the health department, not DHS. And like I stated before, we do have, some sites on CACFP, but the majority of our funding, and that's nationwide, it goes to the children. So who's eligible to receive the meals in these different types of settings? Child care centers, family daycare homes, Head Starts, they all can serve meals for children up to when they turn 13. So the day they turn 13, you can't claim them anymore, right? Then our at-risk programs and our emergency homeless shelters, it's children up to the age of 19. Then our adult daycare centers can serve impaired adults or adults over 60 that are enrolled in daycare. But it is important to note that children up to the age of 18 with mental or physical disabilities may be eligible to receive CACFP meals in a child care setting. However, when they're over 18, they would typically transition to an adult daycare setting at that point, and then they'd be eligible for meals in an adult care setting. And obviously, if you're going to claim a child outside of the norm, any reason you're claiming a child outside of the range or the meal patterns, it would have to be documented with a doctor's note or IEP or things like that. So meal pattern requirements. So in 2010, the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act allowed USDA for the first time in like 30 years or more to make some real changes to meal patterns. If you haven't participated before, you don't really know what the meal patterns were. So these changes aren't as significant to you, but I still have to point out some of the things they changed to make our programs maybe a little more flexible and easier to follow. So before this change, the change came in 2010 from Congress, but it didn't actually get implemented until 2017. So our meal patterns changed in 2017. And we had some grace period and went in just until, I think 2020 is when the grace period was over. And you have to be in compliance with all these meal pattern requirements. So before the change, we had infants that were categorized into just 2 age groups. No, 3 age groups, and now it's just 2. So the infant meal patterns were a little more difficult for you to follow because they were very strict. Basically, prior to the change, it expected an infant to have to take solids, be started on solids by the age of 8 months, which isn't realistic because we have parents now that want their children to be nothing but breastfed or on formula till they're a year old. So they broke it up to where we have 2 age groups now, 0 to 6 months and 7 to 11 months, basically. But the bare minimum for any child to be eligible for you to be reimbursed for a meal, all they have to have is breast milk or formula, with the understanding that when that child's developmentally ready to start on solids, you start them on solids. Okay, so that's been our biggest challenge, is that, well, the meal patterns say all they have to have is breast milk or formula. Well, that doesn't mean you're not serving those other things. So keep that in mind when you'll have a class on meal patterns that you also have to take before turning in your VCA if you're a brand new applicant. It's important to know you want to always make sure that you're not just doing the bare minimum. If you're serving a child those extra components, record it. You can never record too much in this program, right? Then juice was eliminated for infants. They are not allowed to have, juice is not allowed to be a part of a reimbursable meal. And then they added like ready to eat cereals like Cheerios. I always thought that was hilarious because prior to 2017, Cheerios were not a creditable thing to serve an infant. That's one of their first finger foods. So you can serve things like that at snack now, which you probably were anyhow. But now you can claim it if it's part of a snack, but it's not for breakfast. You're serving cereal at a breakfast or a main meal. It has to be that infant cereal, and they may not eat it. But anyway, you'll learn more about that in your meal patterns class. Then also something else that changed is that the fruit and vegetable used to be like a combined component, like you had to serve 2 fruits or vegetables, right? Well, they broke it apart and you have to serve a fruit and a vegetable. But then with every change that Congress makes on our anything, there's usually a commenting period, and they get their take on how, you know, our participants feel about this. And the one thing they did take into consideration is that you don't always want to serve a fruit. And it's beneficial to serve an extra vegetable, like serve 2 vegetables, because sometimes you're trying to introduce new things, right? So the rule was changed to where, yes, it's still a fruit and a vegetable. Like at your main meals, you have to serve a fruit and a vegetable, but you can actually replace now the fruit with the vegetable. So you can serve 2 vegetables. Basically, you just can't serve 2 fruits with a main meal. I don't know anybody that would want to do that anyhow, but. And a few of the other changes that I think that were pretty good, they limited the amount of juice you can serve. So you can only serve juice once a day as part of a credible meal. You have to serve at least 1 whole grain rich item. Now meat, you can serve meat in lieu of your grain component for breakfast up to 3 times a week. So that's kind of cool. You can, things like tofu now credit as meat. So they have some meat alternatives that you can use. What else? Yogurt and cereal. That's probably, this change has probably been one of our hardest ones for folks to get. That yogurt and cereal you serve has a specific amount of sugar it can have. Anything over that amount, you can't use that as part of a creditable meal. And again, you'll learn about those in your meal patterns class and how to calculate those sugar amounts. But a good thing to go by for your cereal, use your WIC. There's a WIC list. Google it, Oklahoma WIC cereal list. It'll pop right up. That's what you should do. But don't do that for your yogurt, because sometimes they have yogurts on there that have too much sugar. But basically, yogurt can't have more than 23 grams of sugar per 6 ounces. And then your cereal can't have more than 6 grams of sugar per dry ounce. So you'll learn more about that later. So here we go. Here's our different components. Meat alternate. A meat's required to be served at lunch and supper, and it can be one of the items offered at snack. If they're not a whole type of unprocessed meat, like a chicken breast or a steak, I don't know. If it's something like a chicken nugget, a hot dog, something that's been processed and formed into a shape, or if it's a combination item like a corn dog, you have to have what's called a CN label or product formulation statement. This label explains how much of the product has to be served to meet the requirement. Because for each age group, there's a specific amount of meat you have to serve and a specific amount of grains and so on and so forth. If you have these items that are processed, you can't just go by what's on the label because there's fillers, there's binders. If it's a corn dog, you know, if you're looking at the weight, part of the weight's bread, part of it's the meat, part of it's, you know, maybe the stick. I don't know how they weigh it, but I know that you have to have a CN label to tell you how much of those items you have to serve to meet the requirements. Right now, they're kind of hard to find. You can find them if you go through like a Penny Keith or some type of vendor like that to get your foods. But going just to like Sam's and places like that, we're starting to see them more and more now. But you need to look on your packages of stuff you're buying. It's going to actually be a little box with information inside it, words inside it, and it'll say CN around it. So be on the lookout for that. Grains are required at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it can be offered at snack. Grains are tricky when it comes to serving sizes, and we have folks with trouble with that because you have to know what the ounce equivalent is, which again, you'll learn about that in your meal patterns. And vegetables and fruit, I already mentioned that. They're both required at lunch and supper. You can offer it at snack. You can serve 2 vegetables, but not 2 fruits at the same time at your main meals. And then your milk is required at breakfast, lunch, and supper, and can be offered as part of your snack. All right, so what meals can be claimed for reimbursement? In childcare and Head Start, just regular old CACFP, same with family daycare home. You can, well, in emergency shelters and adult daycare centers, really the only one that's different is at risk. For everything but at risk, the most you can claim per day, per child, is 2 main meals and a snack, or 1 main meal and 2 snacks. And that's just one of those things, it's because it's regulatory. We have no control over the amount of meals you can claim. Unfortunately, you guys might be serving these children way more than that a day, but this is all you can claim for reimbursement. And it's very important for you to understand that if you do serve more than that in a day to a child, that you have a way for recording which meals you're claiming and which meals you aren't. And you'll learn more about that in your admin and purchasing. They go over those forms to help you know how to keep track of that. For at-risk programs, they're only eligible for 1 meal and 1 snack per day, per child. Now, this is not to say you can't have multiple shifts of a meal. And that's important to know that you can have 2 meal services of any of your meal types too. So we see that a lot for like breakfast and snack, especially during the school year, because you might have a group of kids that come in, they eat, you take them to school, and you might have a later breakfast. That is allowable. You still just can't claim more than that maximum allotted amount per child. So we want to know all the meal times that you serve, and we can come observe at any time. You just need to know that the maximum per child that you can claim. All right, so how are reimbursements calculated? This can become really convoluted really quickly, but just a brief explanation of how you can expect to be reimbursed for your meals once you get to that point of submitting them. So first and foremost, claims are submitted by you guys. For sponsors, all your sites give you your information and you submit 1 claim on behalf of all your sites if you're a sponsor. Claims are required to be submitted within 60 days of the last day of the month. Technically, our due date is the 10th day of the month, right? Many moons ago, before everything went electronic, and I remember it when I was still at a sponsor level, that we faxed our claim in and it was only paid once a month. And if you didn't get it in by the 10th, you were going to be paid late. And that is out the window now, right? Everything's automated and we can do things quicker now. But we still tell folks it's due by the 10th because we still have reports and stuff that we have to send to USDA that are contingent on your timeliness of submitting claims. Don't wait till the very end. Don't wait. Because if it's past 60 days, the system will not allow you to claim it. Now, you can have one late claim every 36 months, but you have to have a reason that was beyond your control, right? Like my center burned down or a tornado blew it away, or I don't know. So it's important for you, make sure you're submitting your claims on time. So for child care centers, like we discussed earlier, you have those income applications that all your families will have to fill out for the children enrolled. And you'll determine how many are free, how many are reduced, how many are not eligible. Then for each of those meal types, there's a rate. There's a specific rate that's tied to those. So when you do your claim, you'll enter, I had this many kids that are eligible for free, this many reduced, this many not eligible. And then you're paid kind of on a sliding scale, like I said before. So the more free and reduced you have, the higher rate you'll get paid for all of your meals. And a side note for sponsors of centers, once you get your reimbursement and depend on how you operate, you can use up to 15% of that money to go towards administrative costs. Now, for anyone, any independent center, any independent institution, you can use our money to pay for things other than food or milk, right? Right now, probably with inflation, it's not going to go that far, but it just depends on how you budget. And you will have a budget that you have to complete in our online system. And you want to budget for things just in case, right? And I'll probably talk about this later when I get into financial liability. But you can use the funds to pay for administrative costs. That's like labor, utilities, things like that. But a sponsor is required, is limited to no more than 15%. That's regulatory. Head Starts, I already said this before, they're all free. So they're going to enter all their kids, they're going to enter all their meals, and then they're going to pay at the highest rate, be paid at the highest rate possible. That's the same for our emergency shelters. Family daycare homes, I already kind of went into detail on how that works, but a sponsor is going to tally up all the meal counts, put it in our system based on the tier of the provider. The amount will be determined. The sponsor is then paid. The sponsor has to pay the providers within 5 days, and then they get their admin amount to use to pay for their cost. And that is contingent on the number of providers they had that month. At risk, that's just like, your Head Starts and emergency shelters. They just go in there, they put in the number they had participating, and they're all categorically free. So they're paid at the highest rate. We typically pay claims on a weekly basis, except for the last full week of each month. That week set aside for when we do our USDA reports that we're required to do. And it's interesting because back in the day, I might always talk about back in the day because I was on the program back in the day, but back in the day, you used to do it once a month, and if you missed it, you'd wait till the next month. We're kind of spoiled now, right? You submit it by a Tuesday at noon, and you'll get paid on Friday, except for that last full week of the month. Over the last year, well, now it's been a couple of years since COVID has happened, and there's always going to be something that happens out of our control. Things will happen that will cause us not to be able to pay what we call on schedule, right? If that happens and we start getting calls and people are upset with us, and it's concerning to us because one of the requirements is that you should be able to operate without these funds. Those of you that are in here because you have to do the VCA and you're brand new, you're going through that, or you will be going through that soon. You're going to have to prove that you can do this without our funds. Right? So if you're calling us mad because we missed a week of payment, it's concerning. And we'll remind you of that, well, you should have funds to operate. So I'm sorry. So just remember that things happen completely out of our control. Sometimes we can't pay you every week. Then also, all institutions except family daycare homes get an additional payment for cash in lieu of commodities. So used to, you had a choice of whether you wanted to take commodities. And I'm actually talking like those commodity foods like the schools get. You could take commodities or you could take cash in lieu of that commodities. We had so few institutions that took commodities that we just said, forget it. Everybody in Oklahoma on CACFP is going to get cash in lieu of commodities on the CACFP program. Now, if you're a school and you're hearing this, you still might get commodities on your school side. But for CACFP, we just give you the cash amount instead, because that's just one less thing for you to keep up with. And when you do your first claim, you'll see it. You'll see a cash in lieu or CIL amount. And DHS will give us the rate, and every year we'll plug it in, and it takes the number of meals or the number of lunches and suppers you claimed, multiply it times that rate, and you'll get that additional payment in your check. But like I said, it doesn't apply to family daycare homes. Providers actually get that, but it's built into the rate, so it's a moot point. All right, so what happens after you're approved and you're on? And all of our other things that we have to do to make sure we have oversight of you guys. So we're required to conduct administrative reviews, or what we call an AR, every 3 years. We have 16 regional specialists, and depending on their caseload, some may have the ability or just choose to review you every 2 years. So just know we're required to come every 3 years, but they can come as often as they'd like, and they can come as often as you need. We're here for technical assistance too. So don't wait. If you're having trouble understanding what's required, don't wait until administrative review. Call us, call your consultant when you get approved and you know who I'll say consultant, but they're called regional specialists. So if I use those words interchangeably, I'm talking about the same person, but you'll have a person in the field that's assigned to you. Call that person. Don't wait until they show up, because our administrative reviews are unannounced. And if we show up and you don't know what you're doing, it's too late at that point. So don't wait, okay? We're not out to get people and write you up and make it hard. We want you to be in compliance and do it right. We also have started a new process. Well, it's not new anymore. We've done it for 2 years. It's called the claim validations. I have to do these every month. Basically, I pull claim data. I look and find things that seem out of the ordinary on the claim data. Things like, are you claiming every single day of the month? Are you claiming every single meal tag? Are you claiming at maximum capacity? So maximum capacity would be take the number of days you operated and the number of kids you had enrolled and multiply that. And if you are claiming exactly those numbers, not saying it's not possible, but it's usually not likely that you're going to have every kid there every day for every meal type. That's a red flag. I have pulled some for claim validations that was one of the reasons, and I was proven wrong. It did happen. I validated every bit of it. So it's not to say that these high risk indicators show us anything when we look. We just still have to have a way to look at things that are considered high risk. Our auditors make us do this. I promise you it's nothing that I want to do. I have to do it 3 times a year, and it's a pain in the neck. But if you get an email from me at some point after you're claiming that said you've been picked for a claim validation, it's like a little mini review. But you just got to send it to me and I'll look at it. And it usually takes me a couple of months, and we're just making sure your claims are correct. And then again, we provide technical assistance anytime you request it. will remind you, your consultant, your regional specialist will remind you. Don't ever feel like you're abandoned. Call them. If you need help, that's what we're here for, okay? And we have a ton of training. Our training has changed like 360, completely opposite since COVID. Before COVID, all of our trainings were on site. If you were brand new, you had to come here for a full day, or if you were ever SD, you had to come here for a full day, which anymore, especially now with how you guys have such a hard time keeping staff, I know it's hard for you to sit here for 2 hours, much less come on site for 8 hours, right? So we have started all kinds of different online training. And we're slowly getting back in the habit of doing some in person now that people are more comfortable with it. But we've broken up all our trainings into small little bits. We also have online training that's self-paced, so you can go in there and work on it. Not that we want you guys to work on stuff after hours, but sometimes that's all you have. Like, we get it. Most of you got an email from me last night at like 10 o'clock. Okay, so we're trying to make it as convenient as for you guys, because training is required, but we also want you to take advantage of it on the things that aren't. We've got all kinds of training that after I get your preliminary application back and that certificate of authority, and if you didn't get those things from me and you don't already have access to our system, send me an email and I'll get you access to our system. It's read-only access, but it'll give you access to where you can get to our training calendar. You already have access. If you're renewing, you guys already can get on and do what you need to do. So we have to tell you about the serious deficiency process. I'm not going to just go through all this because I hope none of you ever become seriously deficient, but we have to advise you that this can happen. So any institution can be declared SD, seriously deficient, for a number of reasons, but generally it's just because in an administrative review, you weren't keeping records correctly. It wasn't malicious, you weren't being fraudulent, you just weren't keeping records properly. So once you're found SD, you have the opportunity to correct those issues. You do a corrective action, you say, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore. I've got this new plan and I'm going to do this to make sure this is corrected, and it's deferred. But unfortunately, it doesn't go away. You can't make that same transgression again later on, because you could potentially then be proposed for termination. SD institutions, in working through this process, takes up so much of our time. We don't want to make you SD, but sometimes things just rise to the level of severity that we have to. Like, there's certain factors we have to look at in a review, or even a claim validation, or a new applicant. Like, we've had new applicants that have come on and end up SD. And it's mostly just because of inadequate record keeping. Unfortunately, we do have some that come on these programs with ulterior motives, and we don't use the F word lightly around here, and the F word is fraud, because we can't just make accusations. We have to have, black and white proof to back up things. But we see it right now with the advances in technology and how accessible it is to alter documents and all that. We are just really having to crack down on the things that we can allow and not allow. We've had instances where individuals have taken online invoices and altered them to make them look like they made more purchases than they really did. Or we've had individuals who do online ordering, say with Walmart, which is great. Like, utilize that online ordering and delivery. But just know, if you're going to use systems like that, we can't accept, if you've ever ordered online or on your app or whatever, you submit that initial order and then you get like a confirmation, right, of your shopping cart. But you all know as well as I do, especially with the craziness of how things are, supply chain shortages and things like that. Even without that, there's going to be substitutions. Or you might have ordered, 20 pounds of bananas, but they only had 18 or something to that effect. It's going to change on your final receipt. So we've had instances where folks were submitting orders, getting that initial order and submitting that like it was proof of purchase, and then they never got the order. So we're really having to make sure, we got to look at your receipt. We got to see, yep, it really came through your bank records, which opens up that whole can of worms. Yes, we have to see your bank records, and folks don't like it, and I get it. I wouldn't want to give anyone my bank records either. But just know that when we request your bank records, they're secure. If you are not comfortable with mailing them in or emailing them, we have secure ways for you to provide us that information. So just know that. But at any time, we can ask you for that documentation, because these are federal dollars. We have to see where it goes. So I kind of got off on a tangent there. But just know, It's a racket when we see people, and it's few and far between, but it's a racket when those come on that are just trying to be fraudulent. It takes up so much of our time. So, all right, so this is why you're here. You're like, hush, and let's get to what you need to know. For some of you that are in here that are already approved and just need help with the VCA, we're going to get to that really shortly. But for those of you brand new, you got to have a UEI, a unique entity identifying number. You might have heard the term DUNS, and that was a number issued through Duns and Bradstreet. And back in April, they changed it. So you had to go get a DUNS, then go to sam.gov and register that DUNS number. sam.gov changed it. Now you just go to sam.gov. They give you that unique identity, that SAM UEI, not the DUNS, and you register it there. So all you got to do is go to sam.gov now, get registered for a UEI, and it's all done there in sam.gov, which will eliminate the confusion that we had. It was a confusing process. I remember being on your side of things and thinking, what on earth am I doing? So you have to have this number. The reason you have to have this number is there are certain criteria for when and why and who we report the amount of money you're paid. These are federal dollars, and we have this federal database you have to report you to. So everyone has to have this UEI, and it has to be renewed every year. So remember that. Pay attention to what your expiration date is. You need to go in there, get registered. We can't pay you till you get this number. We can't even really go forward in the application process until you have this number. And anyway, if you have questions about it, this is one of the things that we absolutely can't help you with. We can tell you where to go and tell you what needs to be done, but we can't help you with it because we don't have access to any of your business records and the things you have to put in there, and we can't have any part of it. So the other thing that's a new requirement, and you'll see that it's on that new preliminary application like I sent most of you last night. And if you didn't get the email from me late last night, email me. I'm going to put my email address in here right now. Tell me if you didn't get it and I'll send you what you need. So I updated that preliminary application, the paper one, to include some of these new requirements. You all, let me make sure I'm not skipping ahead. Okay, so first you had, and I think you guys have all done this, you went online and filled out this thing, and then it gave me the alert, and you've been patiently waiting, like, why is she not responding? Because it said I'd get back with you in 7 days. And that's just because everything's been on hold. So here we are, you've applied and you've done that. This process can take, unfortunately, a few months, just depending on your situation of applying. You all should need to fill out the preliminary application that says FY23 on top, because it's got these new things that we have implemented. If you are an existing entity that's just trying to do your VCA and you're not brand new, disregard this part, okay? You don't have to do any preliminary stuff. You just got to do that VCA that you're needing help with. If you're unsure of what you need to complete, just send me an email, okay? So any form you sign must be hand signed, no more electronic signatures, because we have been seeing stuff that comes in and it's just like font that looks like signature saying, yes, I'm so-and-so, and it's not really so-and-so, and not that a signature can prove that, but it's easier to fake something when it's electronic, right? Something else I also missed, a new requirement, whether you're new or old, you have to be registered on the Oklahoma Secretary of State. We're going to a new payment system, and we can't have more than one entity with the same name. So we might have someone in here called Stepping Stones. And if there is, I'm not trying to call anyone out. That's just a very common name of child care centers in this state. We have it. If you look it up, there's a lot of Stepping Stones in a lot of different towns, but they might not be owned by the same people. Our system can't handle the same daycare with the same name. Neither can this PeopleSoft system that will have to pay you through the state. And generally, the way you guys get around that is you have an actual business name that you operate, and then you're doing business as the Stepping Stones, right? So we need you registered in the Secretary of State, so we make sure we know what your name is, your trade name, your business name, and that we're paying the right people, okay? So just know that you need to contact Secretary of State if you haven't registered there, even if it's just to register your trade name, so that nobody else can take that name and you're the only, ABC 123 daycare in Oklahoma. Okay, anyway, So this preliminary for all you newbies, this is how I need this, because this is how I determine what I need from you. Because depending on if you're nonprofit, for-profit, so on and so forth, I need this so I can make sure I send you the right forms. So get this to me right away. Then you should have also gotten the certificate of authority. This is the form that we use that you should sit along with the preliminary. This is what we use to give you access in our system. You also have to send this in with a color copy of your driver's license. That is required. And the preliminary application states that as well. If you look, it is kind of a confusing system. You don't have a code yet. So the form you got should say not yet assigned. But if that's blank, you don't have a code or agreement number, just put new, put your name. This form is one we use in our whole department. So it has terms that apply to schools too. So you guys in here, if you're brand new, you don't have a number yet. Just give me the name of your institution, your address, your email address. You have to have your date of birth. And then you're going to mark the systems you need access to. So for the purpose of CACFP, you're going to check CACFP application, CACFP claims. And then the type of user, you probably all, and you'll notice it's an interactive form. So if you can't use it interactively, it's important for you to know the type of user you want to be as an authorized representative or a billing director, basically. And then you got to choose your security question. Again, if you can't use those drop downs, if interactive doesn't work on your computer, it's like a color, city of your birth. I forgot, name of your first pet and mother's maiden name. Sometimes folks don't click that drop down and they make up their own questions, and we can't use that because we only have certain questions. And then it's, as an authorized rep, that's going to give you access to the full site eventually, but you want to sign on the signature as user, and then you want to sign again down here at the bottom as the authorized rep. If you're an owner of the facility, all you do is sign that signature of authorized rep. You don't need it approved because you are the approver. But if you're an owner, or if you're multi-sided and you want to give someone else access, you got to approve it. So like if you're a center, right, and you're the owner and you want to give your director access too, great. I encourage that. You need to have at least 2 people on there. But you need to be the authorized, or the director would be your authorized representative. Then you'd have to sign it to approve that, like, yeah, I'm approving this person to have access. Does that make sense? We just want to make sure we're not just giving anybody access. We want your authority to do it. All right. You guys have been quiet. You're just hoping I just will hurry up and get to it so we can get off here, I know. So we're to the VCA part. So what is VCA? It's another one of our wonderful acronyms. Per USDA, we're required to make sure you comply with 3 performance standards. This is regulatory. So every year upon application renewal, and then also for our brand new applicants, you have to show that you're VCA. So the V stands for viable. You have to show that you're financially viable, and I talked about that earlier. You have to demonstrate that you have adequate financial resources to operate this program on a daily basis, again, without our fund. And you can do that by a budget and a management plan, which you're required to do, and you have to show us that you have adequate resources to pay employees and your suppliers during periods of program interruption. It's going to happen. There's going to be periods of delay where it might be a couple of weeks that we can't pay. It's even happened before where we hadn't gotten the funding. I mean, I think folks have we don't have like a direct bank account straight to USDA, right? Every month we have to forecast what we think based on prior months, how much money we need, right? Which is why it's so important for you guys to submit your claims on time. Because if we're forecasting how much money we need and not everybody's submitting their claims on time, we're going to come up short. We have to wait for USDA to send us the funding, right? Sometimes we don't get it before we need to pay. It just happens. Now, we're not going to send out a mass email saying, oh, we didn't get our money from USDA, because then people would panic and think, oh my gosh, like what's happening? Because it's very common that happens. Sometimes it's personal things. You know, we have a lady that does the processing and she's that only person that knows how to do it. And she had surgery. That truly happened, right? There's just things we can't predict. Make sure you have the funds to still operate. So if we are looking at bank records that show you're overdrawn on a regular basis and you don't have money elsewhere, you're not financially viable. Most of you that are receiving Title 20, that alone will make you viable, but not always. Also know that these documents that you send that are your bank records, they can't be altered, they can't be changed, they have to be complete. We're not looking to see, we're not looking to point out how you're spending your money. We're looking to make sure that, obviously you have a good way of tracking your finances and that you have enough funding coming in. And it is required that you send in 12 months worth of records, or at least as many months as you've been open, okay? That's for-profit institutions. Our nonprofit institutions generally have some kind of audit. You can send the audit in lieu of financial statements. If you happen to be a for-profit institution and you receive outside single audits, you're welcome to send that as well in lieu of the records, the financial statements. One thing that's important for you to know is that when you're brand new, we're just going to take your word for it that this is the only account you have and that you're not going to have other accounts where you're transferring money to here and there and all that. What's important for you to know is what is a commingled account. I would say the vast majority of you guys have commingled accounts. That means you have one business account and you do all your transactions out of it. You might have a savings account too, but your DHS is deposited in there. If you're a school, your title money, well, that's not true. Schools, they pretty much have your general fund, so disregard that. But you have one account where everything goes, right? It's not wrong. It's not wrong that you have a commingled account. What's going to be problematic is that you don't have a good method for tracking our funds once it goes into that account, right? So we provide you all the documentation you need, which you'll learn about in admin and purchasing, which is why you need to take that class before you try to fill out the VCA form, because you'll learn more if you need it. Well, you have to take it anyways, but those of you that are not brand new, you still need help more than this. Take that admin and purchasing class we have. But every month you got to keep up with those records of what you spent and then what you made on CACFP. You cannot make a profit off this program. That is against regulation. You also have to be viable. So we need to see that you spent all the CACFP money on CACFP allowable cost, but in the event you came up short or we weren't able to pay you, you still had extra money to keep the boat afloat, right? That's what we're looking for. We're not trying to be intrusive and we don't care. I mean, I had one time a guy that was just nervous to send it. He's like, I go to the casino a lot. Like, I don't care. As long as you're not using our money to go to the casino, we're good. Like, maybe not the best practice to use your business account to go to the casino, but I can't tell you not to do that, right? So what we're looking for is what we want to make sure that you have adequate ways to track all that and that you're viable when our money starts going into your account. And after it does, it's important for you to know we deposit your money into a bank account, right? If you use that bank account to pay credit card payments, we need to make sure you're not using our money to pay those credit card payments, because if we can't tell that, we're going to need those credit card statements too. Like, that's how far reaching this can go with a commingled account. So really, I've had some institutions that decided, I'm just going to get an account just for CACFP. It is not required, but it's certainly a more cleaner way to keep up with your CACFP expenses. All right, financial liability is the hardest one to get past. The next one is your administrative capability. That's your C. You got to show that you're capable. You got to have the right number of staff. They got to be qualified. You got to monitor them. Even if you're not a sponsor and required to monitor, you need to make sure that if people have administrative responsibilities for this program, that you make sure they know what they're doing. If you're a cook, if you're letting your teachers take meal counts and all that, you got to make sure they know what they're doing. And that before you're submitting a claim and you're compiling all that information to submit a claim to us, that it's correct. I mean, you guys are going to make mistakes. There's human error all the time. But we got to make sure we're catching the big ones, because if we come out, you're going to have to pay money back sometimes. And don't let that freak you out either, because you're going to have a review, you're going to be non-compliant, you're going to have to pay money back. Not a big deal, right? One thing I did mention though about being financially viable, there is a question on the VCA, and we'll get to that in a minute, but you cannot use CACFP funds to pay for CACFP debt, or any debt really. So there'll be times that if you ever owe us money back in a review, whether how small or great it is, we will give you the opportunity to pay it back in full by check, or we'll take it out of your future claims. So a lot of people on that question about if you owe us money, how will you pay us back? What funds will you use? They'll say, well, we'll just let you take it out of our claims. That's not an acceptable answer. Make that note now. You have to have additional supplemental income to subsidize when we take money out of your check. You've got other money to cover that loss, right? So what are those extra funds you have to cover when we took money out of your check? All right, then the A is accountable. You got to be accountable, and I've really already talked about this. You've got to show that you've got oversight. So for a nonprofit, that's going to be a board. For a for-profit, it's the owner. And sometimes you have owners of a center and the director does everything. The owner is simply just the owner. And they say, well, I don't have anything to do with that. That's unacceptable, because if unfortunately you become SD and terminated, that owner is going to go on the national disqualified list as well. And so if they're not trained, if they're not knowledgeable, it doesn't seem very right for us to put them on a national disqualified list for 7 years. And they don't even know it, they don't know how to fix it, right? So the owners, the executive directors, the people at the top of your hierarchy, at the top of your organizational chart, those are the people that have to provide oversight. It doesn't mean that you don't have other people that have responsibilities, but you got to have someone that comes back and reviews things and ensures it's right. You've got to make sure that your record keeping is kept up to date and that all your training and monitoring and all those other things, bill patterns are met. How are you going to do that? And there's a question on the VCA where it asks you to say, talk about that in depth. Like I said, the viability one's the hardest. We can teach you all how to keep records, but we cannot teach you to not rely on this money. Okay, this money is to help increase the nutrition and the variety of the meals you're already serving. So keep that in mind. So now we're to the actual VCA documents. Again, if you didn't receive this document from me, send me an email and I will, but I think most of you got it from me. The first couple of pages are just a bunch of regulatory, verbiage that if you don't understand it, don't just say yes, because you have to understand, right? You got to say yes. If you say no, then we got some issues we're gonna have to look at. But if you truly don't understand it, shoot me an email, give me a call. I will tell you that I'm working with you through this VCA process. I'll be the one reviewing these, and there's a lot of you right now. Okay, so don't panic if I can't get back to you right away. We're not going to hold you hostage. We'll honor whatever when you've submitted it and it's complete. So just keep that in mind and bear with me. There's about 40 brand new applicants, and then I have about 30 people. So if you're ever SD, seriously deficient, in the next year that you apply, you have to also do this VCA. And I have about 30 of those. So I've got about 70 of these that I'm looking forward to reviewing. So it'll take me some time. So bear with me, okay? But if you don't understand something, don't just say you do. Ask me and I'll help you understand it. All of that regulatory verbiage is the official, regs where all these questions come from, right? So in the actual VCA where you're responding, it's kind of putting it down in terms for you to understand what we're asking. So on the first page, you really should only be one type of institution. Sometimes I think folks get click, checkbox, click happy and just say, yeah, I'll be one of those too. But really, you're just only one. If you're a daycare, a regular old for-profit daycare, you're a for-profit institution. If you're a public school, click public institution. Educational institution would be more like university or a tech center type of place. Make sure you check the same thing or the right thing. All right, so we're going to go through all these questions. Tell me if you have any questions, speak up, put in the text. You guys are being quiet. All right. For financial viability, you have to choose one of these three things. So whichever one's applicable, you check it, and then you have to provide all of those things under that checkbox. It's not just one of those things. Sometimes I'll get it where you guys check it and then circle which one. It's not that. If you check one, then that means you have an audit, complete audit, and you can send that. If you check number 2, that means you're going to send 12 months of financial statements to include, all of those statements of assets, any activity and statement of change in assets, statements of cash flow, 12 months of bank statements. So you might just give me 12 months of bank records, but if you also have if you do QuickBooks or if you do a spreadsheet or whatever you use to keep up with your finances, send that too, because that's going to support that you have good procedures for tracking your expenses. Then 3 is only for those of you that are new that have not yet been in operation for 12 months. You'll send me the amount that you've been open. Okay, Organizations must have adequate resources for daily operations without the use of program funds. I've already beat that horse, okay? What funds are those? This B here, you're gonna tell me what other funds do you have that you're gonna use when you don't have access to our money for whatever reason, or what, if you're brand new, it's gonna be whatever you're currently using. You don't have our money yet. And then you're gonna send supporting documentation, like if it's your savings account, also send your savings account. If you have an operating account, that's your checking account, and a savings account, send them both. So that shows you're viable. Explain the plan and procedures your institution organization will implement to ensure the integrity and accountability of all program expenses. Ensure the program funds will be used for allowable costs and that the expenses will be supported by source documents. All this is saying is tell us how you're going to keep records of your transactions. You're going to keep receipts. You're going to record it on expenditure worksheets that we provide you. If you need to take the admin and purchasing class, if you're brand new and you haven't yet, because this will help you answer a good portion of these questions about plan procedures and record keeping. And you don't have to use, I don't have to be fancy explanations or novels, just bare minimum of how you're keeping up with your records. Please outline and explain the plan procedure that will ensure all funds received to operate the program are documented and credited to the nonprofit food service account. So that's a term we use that most of you probably don't understand. The nonprofit food service account is basically just your CACFP account. It's to prove that you're not making a profit off this program. It doesn't have to be a separate account. It could be a separate account, but it's just your record to show you're in a nonprofit status of this program. You have to, and that kind of throws people off, especially if you're for-profit. You're like, well, I'm not a nonprofit. Well, I know you're a for-profit institution, but you have to operate CACFP at a nonprofit status. And you need to explain how you'll do that. Then describe your current accounting method. If you don't know what it's called, just tell us what you do. Most of you probably do some type of modified. You pay your bills as they come, right? That would be modified. When you need to go shopping, you go shopping. When you get a bill, you pay it. Accrual would be you pay it when it comes in, but you only record it in the month when it happened. Not many of you do that. Cash basis would be you pay it as it comes in, right? You get a bill, you pay it. So you're either going to be cash basis or modified. But some of you, like if you get a bill, you might not be prepared to pay it for that month. And you might pay it next month. I would say the vast majority, especially our for-profit institutions, are going to be a modified. Just tell us what you're doing if you don't know what it's called. We just want to know what to expect when we look at your expenditure worksheets for the month, how you're recording and where, if it's for the month or if it's for the month it happened. For example, like utilities, right? If you have to keep a monthly record of what your expenses were, technically for September, you're going to be paying for part of August electricity, but you're going to record it in September. Accrual would mean you go back and record it on August because that was an expense for August. Does that make sense? You guys aren't doing that. You're just going to record it when you spent it. And that's okay too. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm assuming so. I see some heads shaking and no questions. So then explain how your accounting method will clearly present information. And that might throw you because we're using big words, kind of like accounting method. I don't really have a method. You do. You do. However you're keeping up with your records is your method, right? So just give us some detailed examples of how you're going to record the cost. How and it might be you're going to use the forms we provide you, and you're going to record the date, the check number or the receipt, not the receipt number, but the name of where you made the purchase and the dollar amount. I mean, you're gonna be like, this is a really vague answer, and we understand it. But what we want you to know is we need to know where and how you're recording it. And you need to be using our forms. And if you're not, if you don't know what our forms are yet, you need to go admin and purchasing so that you learn about what those expenditure worksheets are and the food purchasing forms and all that stuff you're required to fill out. But if you want to create your own information, your own forms, or you already have something that you're using, you can always use something other than our forms. As long as they're equivalent or better than ours, that's great. But let us approve it first. So many of you might be using like QuickBooks or Excel spreadsheets. Send that along and explain that. And tell us when you record it. Do you just keep a basket of receipts and at the end of the month, then you record them all? Do you record your purchases as they happen? That's what we're looking for. Okay. Do you use any software? QuickBooks, ProCare, Minute Menu? What do you use? That way, when our consultants come out to review you, we kind of know what we're asking for. Because that just helps us to be able to verify and make sure you've got a good way to track your expenses. Who is going to be developing a budget? Who is going to review it and compare it to your actual expenses? So if you're renewing, if you operated last year and you're doing a VCA this year, you experienced the new budget and it was terrible. And we can admit defeat. It wasn't off the budget. We made some really significant changes. It made it very difficult. This year we've changed it again. It's a much easier budget, but you still have to make a projected budget for the year. And you still have to make sure that as the year goes, you're on track. Like, it is kind of an arbitrary budget because you only get the amount of meals you serve times the rate, and that's what you get, and you choose how you spend it on allowable cost. But if you put that you're going to spend $2,000 on utilities and you've now spent $3,000, your budget needs to reflect that. So who's going to be the one responsible for doing that, right? You use an accountant at the end of each quarter. That would be an acceptable response on how you're tracking those, but you still have to keep up with it monthly. And whether or not you use our forms or you have your own would be something you need to let me see, or the person that will be your consultant. But you still have to track it monthly. Okay, so we just want to know who's going to be doing these things. Who's going to make the changes? Who's going to make sure you're really doing it? If you're a one-man show, you're going to be doing all that. And it sounds like a lot, but if when you're doing your first budget, it's going to be kind of complicated, and it might not be, depending on how detailed your expenses already are, but it's hard to project when you've not done the program before. But just keep in mind your budget when you do it online, it is a projection. It's not an exact, right? It's just a projection of what you think you'll spend for CACFP. We also do require you to put all your other expenses for your business in that budget too. That comes back to viability. We got to make sure that you have enough money to pay for everything, right? And then this L talks about your commingled account. And I discussed that earlier. Are you going to have a commingled account? If you say yes, that is fine. But then tell me how you're going to plan to make sure that once our funds go into that account, you're going to make sure you track that it only goes to allowable cost. Because if you get our CACFP money and the first thing you do is like pay your car payment or something, and it's, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we got to make sure that it's going to allowable cost. The easiest way to say you're tracking that is to use the materials and the forms we already provide for you. So if you need help understanding that, you'll get that in your admin and purchasing class. Also, if you say no, we're going to require you to submit. If you're saying no, it's not a commingled account, I'm going to get an account just for CACFP, then you've got to open a new account and send us that proof that you've got an account just for CACFP. And then this last one, you just got to say you understand. And I talked about that too. If you have it, once we're paying you and money goes into account, if you're transferring funds here and there and paying credit cards, that opens you up to have to provide those documents for us to review. So just know that. Also, those of you last night, you should have also gotten a consent, a financial record consent form. If you didn't, let me know. But we're just doing that just because we want you to know we're being as safe as we can with your documentation. It's secure. When you send it to us, it goes into a secure place. But I know people are worried about sending us sensitive information like bank records and emails. I get it. If you need a way to send, if you would rather a secure file set up, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'll send you a link to a secure file where it's housed on our network, and only people, myself, because I set up the file, and the people you tell me to send an email to will have access to it. Or you can mail them in, but with sometimes our mail's not ours at the agency, but just mail in general anymore. It's not always the most reliable. So anyway, we have safe ways to transmit information, and we keep your information safe. And that's the point of that consent. Okay, so then administrative capability, you have to submit an organizational chart. Everyone, and that's a new thing for all of our applications this year, everyone now has to submit an organizational chart. We don't need names. We just need titles of people. We just need to know who's at the top all the way down to who's at the bottom. After I get your preliminary application, if you're brand new, I'll send you a manual and some stuff, and you'll get another one again later, but I'm going to go ahead and put together a packet and send it to you. There's examples in that manual of what an organizational chart looks like. Sometimes you've never had to do one. In our resource library, which if you go to our website and you don't have a login yet, you can still access our resource library. So go to that same link where you applied and look on that gold bar on the left, click on resource library. There's examples of organizational charts in there, pre-fillable ones. We just want to make sure that when we need to contact the person who's responsible, we're contacting the right people. We come out in your SD, sometimes we end up sending letters to people who don't even know what we're talking about because we're not reaching out to the right people. So like if you're a nonprofit, the top of your organization chart is going to be the board. Then it's going to be your executive director and coordinators. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. For a for-profit, you're pretty much going to have a straight line. There's not much of a tree, right? It's just owner, director, you just list yourself at the top and go on down. You want to know who, and not the name, just the title, right? Because I know as well as you guys do, especially in those childcare settings, some of your staff is like a revolving door. Like you either they're here one day and they're gone the next. So we just need titles, not names. Number 1 here is for summer food service only. You're not applying for that, so skip number 1. Then briefly outline the hours of work, including breaks and meal periods. This is just so we kind of know it doesn't have to be exact. Just kind of give us our idea of, the main people who have administrative responsibilities, what are their hours of work? So when we show up, we know when we can find those people we need to talk to. It's not to be intrusive. It's just so we make sure we're holding the right people accountable. Then B, you also have to provide a list of personnel who will have program responsibilities. That's even for people, even teachers who serve meals. Because if you're taking meals to the rooms and having the teachers serve, they need to understand about meal patterns, right? We have to make sure that everyone's had adequate training depending on what their job duty is. So on this list, we do need names and titles and job duties. The reason I need names is because anyone who has a responsibility in CACFP, we have to check the NDL to make sure they're not on the NDL. And so if they are, what does that mean for you? That just means they can't be responsible for any program duty. So if somebody were to come up on the NDL on your list that you sent me, I'd first give you a call and let you know, and we get the birth date. Because there might be a lot of John Smiths on the NDL, but it might not be the John Smith in your daycare. So we'll verify if it's the same person. If it is, you just remove that person and not let them have any CACFP responsibility. Provide your hiring plan. So who hires and fires people? That's going to give us an idea of who's in charge, right? For a nonprofit, that's generally going to be your board or the executive director. Your owner is the owner, or your for-profit is the owner. So that's why we ask that. Have all your personnel been hired? This is important, especially for brand new centers. Like, are all your vacancies filled? Do you have enough people to be able to operate this program? It comes back to adequate oversight of the program. Are you adequately staffed? And just, these don't have to be in great detail, but explain your plan for hiring. If you have some vacancies, how do you plan to, and when do you plan? What's your plan for getting those vacancies filled? If you don't have any vacancies, just say a name. New personnel, when will they receive program training? So it's the most important thing for you to know about this question number 4 is that if you say upon hire, that's good. If you say before they do any CACFP duty, that's an acceptable answer. But if you say within 3 weeks or whenever I have, new hire orientation, that doesn't give us enough information to know that they're not serving meals, they're not doing paperwork, they're not doing any of that before they've had training. So make sure they've had training before they do anything with CACFP. That's the right answer, okay? Who's responsible for training? It might just be one person, or you might have someone in charge of training. You can put the title of the person or the name, it doesn't matter. All right, then this form, there's this one and the next one a lot of times comes back blank because I think, I don't have board members. But it says board members, officers, owners, everyone needs to fill this out, right? Everyone has to have oversight. who's responsible for that. So if you're a nonprofit, it's going to be your board. If you're for-profit, depending on the type, it might be an officer or a owner. If you're for-profit, it's probably just going to be your owner. And if you have a co-owner, you're going to list them there too. So we want to know who's responsible for making sure that your records and you're in compliance, everything's in compliance. And I know we are, again, beating this horse to death, but we want to make sure we're holding the right people accountable, and that when there are issues, we're training the right people and addressing it with the right people. So you do have to fill all these things out. Don't put it blank, don't leave it blank, don't make it up. Tell us who they are. The reason it's what about owner and director? Yeah, the director can also provide oversight. If you put them responsible for reviewing records and making sure that it's accurate, yeah, you can do that. The owner need to be the owner and the director. Oh, yeah, it's the same person, just list yourself. Yep. Many of you for-profit, it's just going to be one. You guys wear a lot of hats. I don't know how you keep up with it. All right. We just do our best. That's all I can say. All right, and so why it's important, you might think, why are you asking this? This relationship and compensated, yes or no? The reason we're asking that, for profits, it really doesn't matter anything, right? For nonprofits, it does, because you have to have a board, and an adequate board, we have, with a lot of our regs, it's kind of vague, but an adequate board has to be at least 3 people, because, and like I said, if you're for profit, but just ignore me. But nonprofits have to have a board. It's got to be at least 3 people, because it's got to be at least 3 people, but more than that would be better, because our regs say no more than 49% can be compensated, and no more than 49% can be related to the main person. So the only way we can accomplish that is with at least 3 people. Does that make sense? So you just can't have a board of all your family members or all your employees. You have to have a board that's made up of people that have no financial or personal gain, right? That's why we're asking that here. And then down here, yes, the VCA you did receive in June is a little bit different because I updated with the new stuff. And so if you will send me an email, Heather, because I will forget this right now, send me an email and say, hey, send me the new VCA, I'll send it to you. It is a little bit different. We've added some stuff. This statement here at the bottom, this was effective will be effective October 1. And we've been warning folks, and if you're in the system already, you've probably gotten the emails, and it's really kind of upset. Folks are like, why are you doing this? And it's not to cause trouble or offend anyone or make it harder. But starting October 1, all of our nonprofit institutions, not including military, tribes, there's another one, military and tribes. Oh, and public schools. Because they're all public. People think they're nonprofit, but they're really public institutions. But all our private nonprofit have to undergo a background check prior to being approved on this program. But if you're a licensed childcare facility and you're a nonprofit, you're exempt from that. It's just our private nonprofit, like mostly our at-risk. It also will encompass our community action agencies, our boys and girls clubs. And unfortunately, a lot of those types of institutions have centers that are licensed by DHS, and all those people in those centers have already had background checks. But what we're trying to accomplish here is to make sure that the people we have on our program are all eligible, that don't have any past crimes that compromise, program integrity, like fraud, forgery, things like that. But also the safety of our kids, guys. Like, it's going to be a pain in the neck for some of you. And I might be preaching to the wrong choir here, but if you hear a rumble and people are upset, this is why. We're just trying to make sure that the people that are on our programs and working with children and adults are safe and eligible to be around those kids. And I can't imagine anybody not wanting to agree with that. And so we realized we have this section of folks that are kind of been flying under the radar, not on purpose. It's just something that has come to light for us anyway. And other states do it, and we had to apply for a permission with USDA to implement a new requirement, and it's been approved. So public schools, to work in a public school, you have to have a background check, right? To be to be a family daycare home, you have to have a background check. To be in a center, you have to have a background check. You guys know that. Y'all have to do the fingerprint the national one. But these people that are nonprofit entities that have their own private nonprofit organization, and a lot of times come on as a sponsor of sites for at-risk, and we're finding a lot of boys and girls clubs and things like that. There's not that requirement. So people are falling through the cracks. And I think you all would probably agree, we'd rather be safe than sorry, right? So that's why we're doing it, not to make it more difficult. So if you are a private nonprofit, you will be subject to this background check. And it is a non-fingerprint, it's just a state one. If you're a licensed child care facility, or you work in a school, or if you're a tribe or military, this does not apply to you, okay? Clear as mud? All right, this one, I get back so many times that just says NA. I'm like, no, it is. And this question would start out, describe how the governing board, and folks would stop reading, I don't have a board. This doesn't apply to me. It does. So I changed it to put owner first, because the vast majority of our participants are for profit and have owners. You all have to have oversight, okay? You have to have someone that makes sure that you're doing it right. And like I said, you're still gonna make mistakes. It's not always gonna be perfect. But just briefly tell me, like at the end of the month, you'll review your menus as served, and you'll go over your drums, and you'll learn what that is when you go to admin and purchasing, if you don't know what it is. You're just going to tell us what you do to make sure it's done right before you submit your claim. If you have other people that are responsible for creating menus, you're going to, make sure they're trained and review the menu every now and again. Just things like that, whatever you do or you plan to do to make sure it's done right, okay? Doesn't have to be a novel, just enough to tell us that we know you understand what you got to do every month to make sure it's right, okay? And then we go into accountability. More procedures. Tell us how you're going to ensure that meals meet meal pattern requirements. Just saying I'm going to follow the meal patterns isn't enough. Like, you're just repeating to us what we already told you have to do. How are you going to do it? You'll, post the meal patterns, you'll work with your cook, you'll review your menus, tell us how you'll make sure that they meet, and tell us what you'll do when they don't. So if somehow you realize you've made something and you've missed a component, or say your teacher served meals and you walk in and one of the kids didn't get something, I don't know, you're going to say, well, we won't claim meals that didn't comply, because you shouldn't. If the meal didn't meet meal patterns, you shouldn't claim it. So just tell us that's your plan to do that, okay? How are you going to make sure that ensure the number of meals prepared or ordered? So we say or ordered, that's kind of a summer term, but sometimes you might be contracted with someone to provide meals. But how are you going to make sure that you're making the right amount? That only one kid gets a meal. You can only claim one meal per child. So that's really the point. How are you going to make sure you have enough for all the kids, and that you're only going to claim one meal per child? Does that make sense? Number 3 is for CACFP only. And a lot of times, I don't know, I think you guys are CACFP. Don't skip it. It gets skipped a lot. This is about the income eligibility and your FSIA. You guys have to redo this every year. It's required. If you have to do FSIA, and you'll see, note, this requirement is not applicable for at-risk and Head Starts. Y'all don't have to do that. You just collect enrollment. You do have to do that annually. Everyone else has to do this. Nonprofit daycares, for-profit daycares. If you're brand new, you're going to do it right now, right? You're going to have that before you can be approved. And then you're going to have to say, I'll also do this with my application packets every year. I don't know, whatever y'all's processes are. I'm just making stuff up. But generally, our new applications come out about July to August-ish. And then our application renewal is in October. I'd say pick one of those months and just say, and make it a point. Every October when I'm redoing my application for CACFP, that's also the time I should be renewing all my applications. Because if we come out and do a review and you've got income applications for children that have been there for 2 years and those applications are 2 years old, we got a problem, okay? You can do them more often than once a year because income status of families change, but you have to do them at least once a year. Explain how your daily records will be collected and maintained. So, like, how are you going to keep up with meal records? You need to basically say it's going to be recorded when the meal happens. The wrong answer is that your meal counts will be based on attendance. That is never an okay answer. Your meal count should never be based on attendance, because that doesn't mean just because the child was there didn't mean they were served a meal, okay? And please describe the plan procedure that ensures complete and accurate records of operating personnel, time reports, and payroll, how they're kept in an organized manner. And this one down here also talks about personal time, admin personnel, and these up here are operating personnel. So operating, the difference between operating personnel and admin personnel. Admin personnel are the ones doing applications and making purchases and doing claims. Those are the people doing those administrative jobs. They're buying the carrots. They're paying for the carrots. They're recording the purchase of the carrots. Operating people are cleaning the carrots and peeling the carrots and serving the carrots. Okay. So that's kind of how you need to look at that. And we need to know how, if you're going to use our funds to pay for those people, which you can, to pay for a portion of their salary, how do you keep up with their payroll? Because if you put that in your budget and then you record it every month as using a portion of your funds to pay for those things, when we come out, we need to see that the payroll records reflect that. How are you keeping up with that? However you're keeping up with it is the right answer. You just have to keep up with it, right? This is going on to our claims. I already went over that more than once. Your claims are due by the 10th, but you have until the 60th day. After 60 days, it's just too bad, right? Actually, you can do the one-time exception like I told you, but you shouldn't just pretend like you don't even know about that and get them submitted on time. But give me something. When do you plan to have, what's your plan to have them submitted to make sure they're timely? Number 8 is for summer only. You guys do not answer this one. This is B, cut off. B, you're talking about here your procurement procedure. If you don't have procurement procedures, admin and purchasing will talk about that. Don't even answer this question or attempt to until you've had that class. You have to have a procurement plan. They're very specific on how you have to purchase and procure your food, right? It's USDA's regulations. We have templates in the resource library that you have access to right now that you can go. There is a procurement section, a section in there that's just for procurement, where we have a procurement plan that you just fill out. Go in there and find it. I mean, that'll at least give you a head start before you have to get to the admin and purchasing class. But there's very specific methods for which you're supposed to make your purchases. And it's to make sure that you're spending your money wisely, essentially, that you're getting the biggest bang for your buck, and that you're not just doing the good old, what do they call that? I don't know. It's got to be less. It's got to be less than arm's length transaction. You know what I mean? You can't just pay your friend because you like your friend to do whatever. It's got to be properly procured. It's a lot of your answers here might be repeating the same thing, but we want to know about how you're keeping your records. And as I said before, you got to keep 3 years plus the current. Okay. And where do you keep them? How do you keep them? How are they secure? And who has access to them? Because we legitimately have terminated someone before because we repeatedly gone on site. And if we go and you guys are like, oh, I don't have them, which first of all, your records should never leave, or they should always be maintained at the location where you tell us they'll be. And that was part of what is of your initial, it's come through your initial application online. So we always need to know where to go, where the records will be. And if it's ever different than that, we'll give you an hour. That's our policy. We'll give you an hour to retrieve them. And we don't care if you keep them in a box in the back closet. If that's where they're at, then okay, we'll go to the box in the back closet. You can keep them electronically. That's fine too. Just tell us how you're doing it. And just know that you have an hour to produce them if we show up and you don't have access. But what I was going to say is we had a participant once where we kept showing up and the main person, the owner wasn't there. And the person that was there was like, well, they're locked in the file cabinet and I don't have a key. They ended up getting terminated because that person should have had a key. If you're going to leave that person in charge of your center, they should have access to your records, right? So just make sure that if we don't expect you guys, your directors and owners to be there all the time. We just expect that when we show up, someone has access to the records when we're there. And then repayment of a debt. You have to have adequate sources to repay any debt. And you can't use any funds from CNP to pay for the debt or unallowable costs. We already talked about that. And then unpaid debts are turned over to the Attorney General's office for collection. So that will happen. Unfortunately, if you ever become SD and terminated and you owe an amount, you don't pay it, it gets turned over. We have to have a process for collecting debt, and that's ours in Oklahoma. It gets turned over to the Attorney General's office, and they will serve you. We don't want that to happen. It doesn't happen a lot, but it can, and we don't take payments. You have to pay the full amount. So that's just what we have to make sure you understand about repayment of debt. But we have to know what funds will be used to repay any debt owed to SDE. And the wrong answer is, I will let it come out of my claims. Don't put that. But whatever other funds you have, other than anything that has to do with CACFP, if you owe us money, how are you going to pay it? Okay. And then after that, if you're done with the horrible VCA and we've gotten it approved, you'll go on to your online application for all you newbies. Now, any schools that have sat through and suffered through this, you will have noticed that the VCA you were given was a different version. And as I stated in the very beginning, schools don't have to go through quite as much as what our other institutions do because you are in good standing and operating another program. So we know you're viable and capable. So the fewer questions that you have on your version of your VCA, they were some of the same questions, but everything I rambled on about would have applied. So sorry, you had to listen to more than what you really needed. So once the VCA is approved, I'll then give you full access to the CACFP system. And then I'll assign you to one of the girls in the back. That's Lisa King. She's generally over just our independent daycare centers. Jennifer Pryor, she handles all our at-risk. And then Lori Burrows, she handles our sponsoring organization. Lori is fairly new, so I'm working with her. So bear with her. Once you get assigned, we'll work together to get you approved while she's in training. But once the VCA is approved, you will get access to the system, and then you have your online application that you have to complete. And with everything you've already done, doing that application should be fairly easy for you. Your answers, for the most part, should be in your VCA. It's just filling these online records out and submitting it for approval. You'll have other documentations, which a lot of it I'll have already collected because we need your, your proof of ownership. So if you're a for-profit, that's your EIN, that letter you get from the IRS, or if you've lost that, because we've come across that, something with your EIN and your name showing that you own that entity. You have to do the same thing for DHS too, just to prove that you're really the owner, because you'd be surprised that some of the stuff we get in here and they aren't really who they say they are. So now we got to have proof. You'll have to fill out a vendor form or EFT form so that we can pay you. So there's additional things after the fact that we might be asking you for. A lot of it I collect up on front, but all that has to be collected before you can be approved. But before we'll approve that application online, once it's ready for approval, we will then notify your regional consultant, and they'll arrange an on-site approval visit with you. And it can be a lengthy process because they'll, again, go over all the stuff that you've sat through and listened today, and then your training that you also have to attend. And it's going to be very repetitive, but it's on purpose. We want you guys to succeed. We don't want to just put you on the program and then find you SD, right? So be expecting when that approval visit comes, they have within 30 days to come see you after your online application's done. So that's why it can be lengthy. The VCA can take some time, then you have to do the online application, and then your keep saying area consultant, your regional specialist will come out and do your approval visit within 30 days. And they'll review all your paperwork, and your effective date to claim is contingent on the accuracy and the correctness of your paperwork. Okay. And then even after that, even after the approval, then they'll come back out. We won't even give you claims access then yet, right? We've just approved you and said, yep, you're good to operate. This is the first day you can start claiming claims. But then they'll schedule another visit to come out and do a first claim with you so that they can make sure your first claim is accurate. And if you need a second one or a third one, we'll come back out and so you guys have it. And then also I mentioned this, within your first year after you're approved, you'll have your first administrative review. It's our state policy that we have to review it at least once every 3 years, but for our brand new ones, we come out within the first year. Then if you're ever SD, you get reviewed again in the next year. So we have some exceptions to the rules, but you'll have your first review within that year, Don't wait though. If you're having issues and some doesn't make sense, don't wait until they show up for an unannounced review, because it's too late then. We can't do technical assistance then. We're there for a review. Okay. We're always available here. And that's all I got. Do you guys have any questions? I know I've got a mixed group here of newbies and renewals, and that was a lot of information. I hope it helped. Please fill out your information, get it to me as soon as possible. It will take me time to get through them all. You have 2 centers, do you need a separate UEI for both, or can you use the same? Can you provide 12 months of bank statements from both centers? Yes. So if you're gonna, are you coming on as a multi-sided? Because that would be, it would just depend. I would say fill out your preliminary application, Sarah, and note that on there and send it to me if you're brand new, and we'll talk about the best route for you to go. Because we really don't care what UEI you use as long as it matches your business name. So if you're a business and you own 2 separate centers and they operate under like an LLC, and that's what's on the UEI, that's fine. But if you have, it really depends on how you're set up on the business side of things. Does that make sense? Email me and we'll get into the specifics of your situation. Okay. Any other questions? All right. I appreciate your time. I know it's precious. You guys are, like I said before, wear lots of hats and never have enough time to get any of it done. I get it. So you're welcome. If you call me, I'm going to be honest, I'm not as quick as returning voicemail as I am email. It's just hard to get to everyone. So if you need a quick response, email me. Okay. All right. I will be looking forward to seeing your information. And if you have questions, just email me. Let me know. Thank you guys. Take care.